The sharp crack of the taser shattered the peaceful quiet of the afternoon in the wealthy suburb. Two metal probes sank into the delicate red silk, and 50,000 volts of pure electricity surged through Arya Voss's body. A choked cry of agony escaped her lips as her $500,000 sports car became a silent witness to the brutality. She collapsed. Her body convulsed on the hot pavement. Her head struck the concrete curb with a dull, ugly thud. Officer Vance Crowe stared down at her with a smile of smug satisfaction. Another arrogant one who needed to be put in her place. He had no idea that he had not merely assaulted a citizen. He had just declared war on the most powerful man in the state. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, hit like, and subscribe, because you will not want to miss a single second of the justice that is about to be delivered. At dusk, a warm golden blanket settled over the carefully tended gardens of Oakwood Estates, a neighborhood where the average home price was a figure most people only saw on a lottery ticket. This was Arya Voss's new world after she sold her tech startup for a fortune. She had finally bought the house of her dreams, an expansive contemporary mansion behind imposing iron gates. Her reward was the car she drove that day, a custom McLaren 720S, whose crimson paint gleamed so intensely it seemed to melt into the sun-drenched asphalt. The deep roar of its engine was a symphony of power and freedom. She wore a simple, elegant blouse of soft red silk that matched the car perfectly. She was not merely driving. She was savoring a moment, the culmination of years of relentless work and sacrifice. She was a black woman who had built her own empire, and this car, this neighborhood, was her trophy. Yet, that trophy was a warning flare for Officer Vance Crowe. From his patrol car, parked in the shadow of a massive oak, he watched the McLaren pass, jaw tight. Crowe saw the world through a prism clouded by resentment. He earned a decent salary, but it was nothing compared to the obscene wealth on display here. He saw those people every day, the fund managers, the tech billionaires, the heirs to fortunes, and a bitter envy ate at him. But when he saw a black woman behind the wheel of a car like that, the envy twisted into something even uglier. Drug dealer, he thought, or a high-end escort. Impossible that she had earned it legally. It was a comforting, familiar story that soothed his sense of inferiority. This was his territory. He was the gatekeeper, the one who decided who belonged and who did not. And she, in his opinion, did not belong at all. With a flick of a switch, the bright blue and red lights of his patrol car flared to life, shattering the afternoon peace. He pulled out, and the short, sharp blast of the siren made his authority clear. Arya glanced in the rearview mirror. A flicker of irritation crossed her beautiful face. She had been driving exactly at the speed limit. She checked her makeup in the mirror. Flawless. She knew the script by heart. She stopped at once, the McLaren's engine purring softly as she pulled to the curb. She lowered the window and waited with her hands calmly on the steering wheel, just as her father had taught her long ago. Officer Crowe took his time. He approached the car with a slow, deliberate stride, adopting a practiced posture of intimidation. His hand rested casually on the grip of his Glock. He did not look at her hands. He studied her body, lingering on the curve of her chest beneath the silk blouse. A sneer of disdain curled his lips. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" he drawled, voice thick with condescension. "License and registration." "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" Arya's voice was calm and steady, giving no hint of the irritation she felt. She had long ago learned that a certain tone could be read as defiance. "I'll ask the questions," he snapped. "You were driving erratically. License and registration. Now." It was a blatant lie. She had been driving as if in a parade. But she obeyed. Slowly, she reached toward her bag on the passenger seat. "My bag is on the seat beside me. I'm going to get my wallet." She withdrew the documents with deliberate movements, and handed them through the open window. He snatched them from her hand. He glanced at the license, eyes widening for a fraction of a second at the name Arya Voss, then fixed on the address only a few blocks away. It did not fit his plan. "New to the neighborhood?" he asked, suspicion heavy in his tone. "Yes," she answered simply. "How nice," he said, the words dripping poison. He returned the documents, but his gaze was hard, calculating. He was searching for any pretext to escalate. "You know, we have a lot of problems with people who come into this neighborhood who don't belong here and start causing trouble. We like to keep things orderly." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Sometimes a contribution to the police charity fund can go a long way toward keeping things running smoothly for you. A little show of community support, you understand." Arya stared at him, feeling a chill. This was not a simple traffic stop. It was extortion. He was demanding a bribe. The brazenness of doing it in broad daylight in her own neighborhood enraged her. All the years of being told to stay quiet, to be submissive, to not make trouble vanished in that instant. "No, officer," she said, her voice now as sharp and cold as ice. "I don't think I understand. You're suggesting I pay you to keep from being harassed in my own neighborhood." Crow's face darkened. His facade of authority cracked, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. "You've got a sharp tongue, don't you? That's the problem with your kind. Get a little money, and you think you're better than everyone. Think the rules don't apply to you. The only one who seems to think the rules don't apply is you, officer," Arya shot back, raising her voice with righteous indignation. "Now, if I'm not being charged with any crime, I'd like to leave." That was it, the final challenge to his fragile authority. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," he growled. "Get out of the vehicle, right now." "I'm not getting out of my car," Arya stated firmly. "You have no reason to order me out. This is illegal." "I'll show you what's illegal." Crow's face had become a mask of pure rage. He reached for his belt, bypassing the handcuffs and pepper spray, and seized the grip of his taser. "I gave you a lawful order. Get out of the car." Before Arya could react, he drew the weapon. The red laser dots danced across her chest. What followed was a whirlwind of noise and searing pain. The stale smell of burnt coffee in the station house was a world away from the jasmine-scented air of Oakwood Estates. For Officer Vance Crow, however, it was a sanctuary. There, within those beige concrete block walls, he could reshape reality to fit his narrative. The adrenaline of the confrontation still coursed through his veins, but it was a triumphant, exhilarating feeling. He had put her in her place. He had shown her who was in charge. Then came the most crucial part of his ritual, sanctifying his actions with paperwork. The official report was his gospel, the sacred text that would transform his brutal assault into a heroic act of law enforcement. He sat at his cluttered desk, cracking his knuckles as he logged into the report system. His rookie partner, a young officer named Julian Vargas, stood nearby, eyes wide and nervous, still visibly shaken. "You see that kid?" Crow asked, leaning back in his chair with a grunt of satisfaction. "That's how you handle them. You can't give them an inch. If they get aggressive, you get more aggressive. When they see a weapon, they usually back down. This one was just dumber than most." Vargas swallowed hard. "She hit her head really hard, Vance. The paramedic said it was a serious concussion, maybe a skull fracture." "She brought it on herself," Crow said with contempt, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "She resisted a lawful order and got aggressive. I used the minimum force necessary to subdue the suspect and ensure officer safety." End of story. He turned to the keyboard. His fingers flew across the keys, weaving a web of lies. Every word was chosen with care. Another brick in the fortress of his own infallibility. High began with the initial observation. A red McLaren driving erratically, weaving between lanes, suggesting the driver was under the influence of narcotics or alcohol, a complete fabrication, but it laid the foundation for a legitimate stop. He continued with the encounter. Upon approaching the vehicle, he detected a faint odor of what he believed to be marijuana. The driver, later identified as Arya Voss, was agitated and resistant. Her pupils were dilated, and she spoke with difficulty. He paused, a cruel little smile on his lips. It was a classic procedure, a proven script. He detailed her refusal to exit the vehicle, presenting it not as a citizen exercising her rights, but as an act of aggressive defiance. The suspect began verbally abusing the officer, using profanity and threats. She made several restless movements toward the passenger side of the vehicle, leading me to believe she might be attempting to retrieve a weapon. This was the key, the magic words that justified everything that followed. Officer safety. It was the ultimate trump card, a phrase that silenced questions and absolved sin. Finally, he described the use of force itself, framing it as a reluctant last resort. Fearing for his safety and that of the public, and faced with the suspect's refusal to obey verbal de-escalation orders, he deployed his department-issued conducted energy weapon. The device proved effective in gaining compliance. During the subsequent fall, the suspect struck her head on the curb. She was handcuffed without further incident and received immediate medical attention. He even added a final ironic touch. It should be noted that the officer's body camera experienced a technical malfunction shortly before the traffic stop was initiated and did not record the incident. A convenient, undetectable failure. Perfect. He printed the report. The warm paper felt like a verdict in his hands. It was a masterpiece of fiction, an impeccable narrative that cast him as the calm, professional hero and her as the deranged, dangerous criminal. He had done it dozens of times before with different faces and different cars, but the story was always the same, and the system always believed him. His story was backed by the weight of the badge, the credibility of the uniform. Hers was nothing more than the hysterical ranting of another neighborhood rat who had gotten herself into trouble. He signed with a theatrical flourish and tossed the report into the outbox. He called his union representative, a hardened veteran named Fletcher, as a mere formality. "Hey, Fletcher, it's Crow. Had to deploy a taser on someone in Oakwood. She's claiming police brutality. Same old story. Just giving you a heads up." "Oakwood," Fletcher's voice carried caution. "That means money, Vance. You sure your paperwork's solid?" "Solid as a rock," Crow laughed. "She was off the charts, acting crazy. I've got a rookie as a witness. Everything's by the book." "All right, keep me posted," Fletcher said, and hung up. Crow leaned back, feeling invincible. He pictured the woman in a hospital bed with her head throbbing. He hoped it hurt. He hoped she had learned the lesson. A little reality would do people like her good. He felt a sense of satisfaction, of order restored. He had protected the peace of the neighborhood. He had done his duty. Meanwhile, across the city in the quiet, sterile environment of the finest private hospital, a team of neurosurgeons worked diligently to relieve the pressure on Arya Voss's brain. She lay unconscious, intubated, connected to a tangle of wires and tubes that linked her to machines beeping and recording the fragile rhythm of her life. A charge nurse, following protocol for any unidentified critical patient, checked Arya's designer bag for identification. She found the wallet, the driver's license, and an emergency contact card. The card held only a single private, unlisted number with the simple inscription, "Dad." The nurse, a kind woman named Maria, stepped into the hallway and dialed the number, completely unaware that she was about to detonate a bomb that would destroy Officer Vance Crow's world. The phone rang twice before a calm, firm voice answered. "This is Governor Elias Crow." The governor's mansion was a bastion of old, discreet power. Its neoclassical columns and majestic gardens symbolized stability in a chaotic world. In his private study, a mahogany-paneled room filled with books on law, history, and political strategy, Governor Elias Crow was reviewing preliminary budget proposals. He was at the height of his power. His presence was imposing, filling any room he entered. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed no detail. He had built his career on always staying one step ahead, a master tactician who wielded power not with a heavy hand, but with the precision of a scalpel. His public image was one of serene authority and reflective reason, but beneath that refined exterior lay a core of tempered steel, forged in the crucible of political battles and personal tragedy. His wife had passed years earlier, leaving him solely responsible for his brilliant, stubborn daughter. Arya was the center of his universe, the only person for whom he felt absolute, unconditional love. When his private encrypted cell phone vibrated, he glanced at the unknown number with a flicker of irritation. He answered with his usual laconic greeting. "This is Governor Elias Crow." The nurse's voice on the other end was hesitant but professional. "Governor, my name is Maria. I'm a registered nurse at City General Hospital. I'm calling from your daughter's emergency contact. There's been an incident. Ari has been admitted. She's in critical condition." For an instant, the world stopped. The budget proposals on his desk became meaningless scribbles. The air in the room grew thin and cold. A visceral, primal fear clenched his heart so tightly it nearly buckled his knees. But when he spoke, his voice was supernaturally calm. "Tell me everything." He listened, knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. He processed the words: police incident, traumatic brain injury, subdural hematoma, emergency surgery. Each sentence was a devastating blow against the carefully constructed walls of his composure. The nurse, sensing the gravity, quickly recited the few details she remembered. A traffic stop, a struggle, a fall, an officer named Crow. By the time she finished, the fear that gripped him had transformed completely. It was a rage so pure, so cold, and so immense that he felt as if a black hole had opened in his soul, consuming every other emotion. It was not the explosive anger of an ordinary man. It was the calculated, patient fury of a predator. "She will receive the best care in the world," he said in a deep, threatening voice. "Spare no expense. I want a private security team at her door within moments. No one, absolutely no one, enters or leaves that room without my express authorization. Do you understand?" "Yes, Governor," the nurse whispered, intimidated by the force of his will. He hung up without another word. For a full minute he remained motionless, eyes closed, absorbed in a whirlwind of strategic calculation. His first instinct was to go to the hospital, to be at her side, but he knew that would be a mistake. His presence would turn everything into a media circus, compromising the investigation before it even began. Justice for Arya would be delivered with precision, not passion. It required the full crushing weight of the system he controlled, applied to this man with surgical exactness. He picked up his secure line and made his first call. It was to Quentin Lang, the state attorney general, a man he had known and trusted for decades. "Quentin, it's Elias. I need a favor." In their world, those words carried the weight of a blood oath. No explanation was necessary. "What do you need?" the attorney general asked in a grave voice. "There was an incident in Oakwood. An officer named Crow. My daughter Arya is in the ICU. He assaulted her." He let the words hang in the air. "I want this handled unofficially for now. I want your best investigators, the most discreet ones. I want them to treat it as a potential capital case. I want every camera, every witness, every piece of data secured within the hour. I want this man's complete file, every complaint, every commendation, on my desk before morning. And Quentin, I want him to feel safe. I want him to believe he got away with it, to get cocky, to lie. I want him so tangled in his own deception that when the net falls he won't even know where he's standing." "Consider it done, Elias," Long said, with the same steel in his voice as the governor. "And Elias, I'm truly sorry." The governor's next call was to the superintendent of the state police, a woman renowned for her relentless efficiency. "Colonel," he began, I authorize a full surveillance operation on a municipal officer, Vance Crowe. I want his phone tapped, his finances monitored, his associates identified. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about. Use whatever resources you deem necessary. This authorization comes directly from my office. His final call was to his chief of staff. Clear my schedule for the coming period. Tell the press I have the flu. I'm working from home. No one contacts me except the Attorney General and the Colonel. This is alpha priority. He ended the call and walked to the large window overlooking the mansion's extensive gardens. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in oranges and purples, but the governor saw none of it. His gaze was fixed on an uncertain future, a moment he was now meticulously planning, a moment when Officer Vance Crowe would stand in a courtroom and realize the colossal error he had made, an error that would change his life forever. The governor would not merely deliver justice for Arya. He would destroy this man's life piece by piece. He would make him such a terrifying, absolute example that no officer in his state would ever again believe he was above the law. The rage was still there, a cold, hard diamond lodged in his chest, but now it had purpose. It had a plan, and he would be patient. Some time later, Officer Vance Crowe strode confidently into the Internal Affairs Division with the unshakable assurance of a man who had never faced consequences for his actions. The interview summons was a routine formality, a mere bureaucratic inconvenience. To him, it was a minor annoyance, an opportunity for the desk jockeys to feel important before rubber-stamping his report and filing it away with the other unfounded complaints. High had his version clear. He had his union representative on speed dial, and he had the firm conviction that the thin blue wall of silence was as impenetrable as a fortress. They led him into a small windowless room furnished with a metal table and 3 chairs. 2 investigators waited for him. They were not from his precinct. Their suits were impeccably tailored and their faces impassive. They were state officials chosen personally by the Attorney General. Crowe, of course, did not know that. He simply saw them as a slightly more refined version of the usual bureaucrats. "Officer Crowe, thank you for coming in," said the lead investigator, a silver-haired man named Pierce Lang with penetrating eyes. "I'm lead investigator Lang. This is investigator Mei Lin. We're here to review your report on the incident with Ms. Voss. Just a formality to clear a few things up." The word formality was like a bucket of cold water on Crowe's ego. He leaned back in his chair, adopting an expression of weary professionalism. Of course, anything to help. It was an unfortunate situation. I hoped to avoid the use of force, but the suspect's actions left me no choice. "So let's start from the beginning," Investigator Lin began, the younger of the two, opening a file. "Your report indicates you initiated the traffic stop due to erratic driving. Can you describe that for us?" Crowe leaned forward, eager to answer. "Absolutely. The vehicle was weaving within its lane, crossing the yellow line twice. At one point, it nearly hit a parked car. My first thought was that the driver was under the influence. Given the high-end nature of the vehicle, I also considered it might be stolen. I was a natural storyteller, adding details that made the lies sound plausible." Lang nodded slowly, revealing nothing in his expression. "And when you approached the driver, you said you smelled marijuana." "A slight odor, yes, but unmistakable," Crowe confirmed. "And her behavior was that of someone under the influence. Agitated, paranoid, glassy-eyed. I asked her to step out of the vehicle for a field sobriety test, for her own safety and that of others. That's when she became aggressive." "Aggressive in what sense?" Lin asked. "She started yelling, using every swear word in the book," Crowe said, shaking his head with an expression of feigned disappointment. "Told me I had no right. Said she was going to have my badge, the usual stuff you hear. But then she started making restless movements, looking for something around the car. In a situation like that, you have to decide in a split second. My training kicked in. I feared she was trying to retrieve a weapon. Long leaned forward, steepling his fingers. A weapon. Did you see one? You never see it until it's too late, Crow said gravely. It's the totality of the circumstances. The erratic driving, the odor of narcotics, the verbal aggression, the restless movements, all of it painted the picture of a dangerous, unstable person. I ordered her again to exit the vehicle. She refused. I gave a final warning. When she continued to refuse to comply, I deployed my taser. He delivered the line with the conviction of someone who truly believed he had acted correctly. He conveniently omitted his demand for a bribe. "And your body camera?" Long asked in a casual tone. It failed. "Yeah, damn thing. They always break," Crow said with a sigh of frustration. "I tagged it for maintenance that same morning, but it hadn't been checked yet. I noted it in my report. It's a shame. The recording would have corroborated everything I'm telling you. I was proud of that detail. The preemptive documentation of the failure demonstrated foresight." The two investigators exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. To Crow, it looked like they were accepting his version. In reality, they were marveling at the brazenness of his lies. They had already seen the clear footage from the doorbell camera across the street. They had seen the footage from Arya's dashcam that had recorded every word of the encounter. They knew there had been no erratic driving, no smell of marijuana, no suspicious movements. They knew the camera had not failed. State technicians had already recovered the incriminating file from its internal memory. They were simply giving him more rope. "And the statement from your partner, Officer Vargas, does it match yours?" Lynn asked. "Of course," Crow said, puffing out his chest. "The kid was shaken, but he saw the same thing I did. He'll tell you the same." He did not know that Vargas, torn between perjury and his career, was at that very moment in another room with two other investigators, tearfully telling the truth. "One last thing, Officer Crow," Lang said, closing his file. "In your professional opinion, was the force you used proportional to the threat you perceived?" Crow looked him straight in the eyes with an expression of feigned sincerity. "Absolutely, 100%. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize a clear and imminent danger to myself and the public. I would do it again tomorrow under the same circumstances. I did my job." "Thank you for your time, officer. That's all," Lang said in a monotone. Crow stood and shook their hands with a confident smile. "Glad we could clear that up." He walked out of the room feeling euphoric. He had done it. He imagined the woman wherever she was, trying to weasel her way out with some expensive lawyer. It would not matter. His report was filed. His testimony was on the record. The system would protect him. He stepped into the sunlight, completely unaware that he had not merely been interviewed. He had been a key witness in the preliminary hearing of his own prosecution. He had just committed perjury calmly, confidently, and repeatedly, and every lie had been recorded. The net was not merely tightening. It was now locked, and he was the one who had just thrown away the key. While Vance Crow basked in the glow of his supposed victory, a silent, methodical machinery of justice operated in the shadows, driven by the cold fury of the most powerful man in the state. Governor Elias Crow had transformed his study into a war room. The budget proposals had been replaced by a large corkboard, a web of photos, documents, and timelines connected by red thread. At the center was an unflattering photograph of Officer Crow with his cold, empty eyes. The operation was a masterclass in discreet efficiency. Attorney General Quentin Lang's team, a small elite unit of former federal prosecutors and forensic specialists, worked without rest. Their primary priority was the preservation of evidence. Within an hour of the governor's call, they had legally and discreetly secured every last digital trace of the incident. They did not stop at the doorbell camera across the street. They canvassed a 4-block radius and found 3 additional cameras that had captured the McLaren traveling at a steady, perfectly legal speed moments before the stop, immediately disproving Crow's first lie. A technology specialist, a prodigy recruited from Silicon Valley, was sent to the impound lot where Aria's McLaren was being held. While the local police believed it was simply evidence in a routine resisting arrest case, the specialist was there for the vehicle's data. He downloaded the entire contents of the event data recorder, showing speed, braking patterns, and GPS coordinates, confirming it had never weaved. Then he accessed the dashcam. The small factory-installed camera had not only recorded the road, its microphone had captured with perfect clarity every word spoken inside the cabin. The audio file was devastating. It recorded Aria's calm, polite tone, followed by Crow's escalating aggression, and finally his unmistakable, lascivious demand for a bribe. It was the definitive proof. Simultaneously, another team was digging deeply into Crow himself. They did not merely request his file through official channels. They executed a state judicial order on the central records of the precinct, bypassing any local official who might try to manipulate the information. The file they received was thick, held together by a rubber band about to snap. Formal complaints spanning his career, an astonishing number. Complaints of excessive force, illegal searches, racial discrimination, and verbal abuse. Case after case. The story was eerily similar. A minority citizen, a questionable stop, an escalation by Crow, and a complaint ultimately dismissed as unfounded after an internal investigation by his own colleagues. The investigators began the painstaking work of contacting the complainants. Many were initially reluctant, accustomed to having their experiences dismissed for years. But when they learned it was a state investigation reporting directly to the Attorney General, a wave of statements poured forth. They spoke of Crow's poisonous language, his contempt, the way he seemed to enjoy their fear and humiliation. An elderly Latino man described how Crow had thrown his prescribed medications onto the ground during a traffic stop. A young black college student described how Crow had illegally searched his car and found a bag of marijuana that was not his. Story after story painted a portrait not of a police officer, but of a predator with a badge. The governor's surveillance order on Crow was also yielding results. The wiretap on his phone was a gold mine of corruption and bigotry. They recorded him bragging to another officer about the incident. "Taught a rich one in a race car a lesson," he laughed. "You should have seen her face when the 50,000 hit. Dropped like a sack of potatoes." He complained that the internal affairs interview was a waste of time and called the investigators suck-ups. Most damning of all, they recorded his conversation with his union representative. "Stick to what's in the report," Fletcher advised. "The kid Vargas is a rookie, but he'll hold the line. It's your word against hers. We both know who they're going to believe." It was clear conspiracy to obstruct justice. By the time the evidence was complete, it was overwhelming. They had video, audio, forensic data from the car, the testimony of a dozen prior victims, the tearful confession of the rookie partner, and wiretap recordings in which he confessed and conspired. The case was not merely solid, it was airtight. In his study, Governor Elias Crow reviewed the final executive summary prepared by the Attorney General. He read every word with an impenetrable expression, a mask of cold control. He looked at the photographs of his daughter in the hospital bed, the tangle of tubes and monitors, then at the smiling face of Vance Crow on the corkboard. He answered the secure phone. "Quentin," he said in a low voice resonant with absolute power, "the preliminary phase is over. It's time to proceed. I want the charges against my daughter withdrawn and the prosecutor's office to issue a public apology for the erroneous filing of the complaint. And I want a state arrest warrant issued for Officer Vance Crow. I want the state police to execute the warrant at his station during roll call. Let his colleagues see it. The charges will be aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, perjury, violation of civil rights under color of law, and solicitation of a bribe. I want his bail set so high he never sees the light of day again. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Governor," the Attorney General answered. The hunter is about to become the prey. The governor hung up. He looked at Crow's photograph one last time before pulling it from the board. He walked to the fireplace where a low fire burned and dropped the photograph into the flames. He watched as the edges curled, turned black, and dissolved into ash. It was a symbolic act. The invisible net, woven in darkness with threads of data, testimony, and the full weight of the state, had just been drawn tight. And at its center, still oblivious to everything, stood a man who was about to discover the true meaning of power. Morning roll call at Precinct 12 was a familiar ritual. Stale coffee, bad jokes, and the monotonous voice of the sergeant on duty. Officer Vance Crow leaned against the wall, drinking from a styrofoam cup, feeling euphoric. The internal affairs interview was a distant memory. The incident was already old news. In the locker room, he had been telling his colleagues a highly exaggerated version of the story. He saw himself as a lone hero confronting a deranged, drug-addled woman in a supercar. He reveled in the silent nods of approval, the camaraderie of backslaps that reaffirmed his belief in his own righteousness. The thin blue wall was real, and it protected him. I was in the middle of telling a joke when the double doors of the training room burst open. Sergeant Davis, who had been droning on about a recent string of burglaries, stopped mid-sentence. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood not the precinct's own officers, but state police. 4 of them, tall and imposing in their immaculate gray uniforms and campaign hats, faces serious and unsmiling. They were led by a captain whose silver badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The room fell silent. State police did not appear at a municipal station just for coffee. Their presence was a bad omen. The captain's gaze swept the room with cold disdain before settling on Crow. Vance Crow, his voice cut through the silence like a knife. Crow's smile faded. He straightened, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Yeah? What do you want?" The captain and 2 troopers began walking toward him. The echo of their boots on the linoleum floor filled the room. The other officers present instinctively stepped back, opening a path, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise and morbid curiosity. This was not an awards ceremony. "Officer Vance Crow," the captain repeated, stopping in front of him, voice devoid of courtesy. "You are under arrest." The words hung in the air as if they had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Crow stared at him, trying to comprehend what was happening. It had to be a joke, a cruel joke. "Arrested? For what?" he managed to stammer, a nervous laugh dying in his throat. The captain did not smile. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "There is an arrest warrant issued against you by the State Superior Court. You are charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, perjury, violation of civil rights under color of law, and solicitation of a bribe." He read each charge deliberately, every word a precise blow against Crow's crumbling facade of confidence. Crow's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, ashen hue. Bribery. Perjury. These were not the fabricated assault charges he might have expected. These were hard, cold felonies that would end his career. "This is," he shouted, voice breaking. "It was a good stop. The woman was a psychopath. My report, your report was a fabrication. And you committed perjury when you repeated those lies to the state investigators," the captain said in an icy voice. "Now turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a moment, Crow stood frozen in disbelief. He looked around at his colleagues, his brothers in uniform. He searched for support, for someone to step in and stop this madness. But he found none. He saw only stunned silence, averted eyes, and the growing realization on their faces that one of their own was falling from grace. The thin blue wall was discovering it was not a fortress. It was an ally of convenience. "Turn around, now," the captain ordered. When Crow hesitated, the 2 troopers acted with professional speed. They seized his arms, spun him around, and slammed him against the wall with enough force to knock the breath from him. The sound of his body hitting the wall echoed the sound of Arya's head striking the curb. Crow cried out in pain and shock. One trooper twisted his arm behind his back, while the other unclipped the handcuffs from his own belt and locked them around Crow's wrists. The cold, familiar click of the metal was a sound he himself had inflicted on hundreds of people. Now it was the sound of his own condemnation. "You have the right to remain silent." The captain began reading him his Miranda rights in a monotone, emotionless voice, in front of the entire shift. The humiliation was total, part of the spectacle. As they marched him out of the room, a broken, babbling, disgraced figure, the news was already spreading. A press release from the Attorney General's office had just reached the media. It announced that all charges against Arya Voss had been withdrawn, citing conclusive evidence of her innocence and clear indications of serious misconduct by the arresting officer. It did not name her, referring to her only as a respected businesswoman and resident of Oakwood Estates, but it announced the arrest of Officer Vance Crow in stark, unyielding terms. Crow was shoved into the back of a state police cruiser, the same type of car he had driven with such arrogance for years. As the door slammed shut, he saw the faces of local news reporters who had been tipped off and were now surrounding the station, cameras flashing. His carefully constructed world, his career, his reputation, his freedom, had been completely destroyed in a matter of minutes. The hunter had not merely become the prey, he had become the trophy. And as the cruiser pulled away, leaving behind his stunned colleagues and the media circus, a single terrifying thought began to form in his mind. Who was she? Who was this woman capable of bringing the full weight of the state down upon him? The question would haunt him all the way to the state penitentiary, but he was still far from understanding the terrifying truth. The trial of Vance Crow became the most sensational legal event the state had seen in decades. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension, packed with journalists, legal scholars, members of the police union, and curious citizens. At the center of it all sat Vance Crow, now a shadow of his former self, dressed in a suit that hung poorly on him, his face pale and gaunt. He sat beside his defense attorney, a renowned lawyer named Grant Wallace, whose fees were covered by the police union. Wallace was an imposing figure, known for his aggressive tactics and his skill at turning police officers from villains into victims of a biased system. His strategy was simple and brutal. If you cannot refute the facts, destroy the victim. Because Arya Voss's identity as the governor's daughter remained a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of the prosecution, Wallace believed he was facing a wealthy, privileged woman trying to leverage her position. His intention was to paint her as the villain, a socialite manipulator with a history of instability. The prosecution, led by the state's top trial attorney, Sofia Ortega, known for her meticulous preparation and icy courtroom demeanor, began by methodically laying out the initial facts of the case. They presented the communications center logs and GPS data, showing that Crow had no legitimate reason to be where he was, suggesting he had been hunting for targets. They presented Arya's financial records and a recent physical examination, proving she was a successful, sober businesswoman, not the drug addict Crow had described. Then Arya Voss took the stand. She radiated elegance and serenity, dressed in a conservative yet stylish navy suit. The last traces of her injuries were barely concealed beneath flawless makeup. She spoke in a clear, steady voice, recounting the events of that afternoon with precision and without drama. She described Crow's immediate hostility, his condescending tone, and his explicit demand for a bribe. When it was Wallace's turn to cross-examine her, he rose like a predator. "Ms. Voss," he began with a voice laden with false compassion, "this must have been a terrible experience for you. It must be difficult to remember the details accurately given your condition." "My condition?" Arya asked, arching one eyebrow slightly. "Well, you had just purchased a $500,000 car. The excitement, the adrenaline. Isn't it true that you were seen celebrating with friends at a nightclub the night before this incident?" Wallace began weaving his net. I had dinner with 2 friends to celebrate the sale of my company. Yes, Arya answered calmly. Dinner, or was it something more? Isn't it true that you consumed several alcoholic beverages? That in fact you were quite intoxicated? Objection, Ortega said, rising slowly. Counsel is testifying. There is no evidence to support this claim. The judge nodded. Wallace was undeterred. He changed tactics. Ms. Voss, you have no prior experience with law enforcement, correct? You don't know police procedure, correct? Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted Officer Crow's routine safety questions as a demand for a bribe? He told me that a contribution to the police charity fund would ensure that everything continued to go smoothly for me. Arya answered firmly. I don't believe that is standard procedure. Wallace paced in front of the jury. Let's talk about your attitude, Ms. Voss. You admit you refused to comply with a lawful order to exit your vehicle. An order given by a uniformed police officer. Why did you do that unless you had something to hide? I refused because the order was not lawful, Arya declared. Officer Crow had no probable cause to order me out of my car. I was exercising my constitutional rights. Wallace scoffed dramatically. Your constitutional rights, or were you simply being arrogant? Ms. Voss, did you think that because you were driving a luxury car in a luxury neighborhood, you were above the law? Did you tell him, and I quote from Officer Crow's report, I'll have your badge for this? I never said that, Arya said, locking eyes with him. Officer Crow is lying. For 2 hours, Wallace attacked her reputation without mercy. He dredged up a speeding ticket she had received in college. He implied that the money from the sale of her company was somehow illegitimate. He painted her as a rich, spoiled, volatile child who had thrown a tantrum when a hard-working police officer had the audacity to question her. Through it all, Arya remained steadfast, her composure unshakable. She answered every question with the same calm dignity, never once rising to his provocations. Vance Crow, sitting at the defense table, watched the performance with growing confidence. Wallace was brilliant. He was turning the jury against her. Crow could see it in their faces. They were beginning to doubt her, to see him as the victim of a malicious lie. He began to believe he might walk free. He had the support of the union, a relentless attorney, and the deep-rooted social prejudice that often gave more credibility to a police officer's word than to a citizen's. What Crow and his attorney did not know was that they were not in an ordinary courtroom. They were performing on a stage meticulously prepared by the prosecution. Every lie, every insinuation about Arya's character was like shoveling dirt onto the grave of their own client. Ortega let him continue. She let him build his entire defense on a foundation of character assassination and falsehoods. She knew that the higher he built his house of cards, the more spectacular its collapse would be. The jury was being prepared not to acquit Crow, but to feel the full righteous fury of betrayal when the truth was finally revealed in irrefutable form. And that moment was approaching. Ortega had an ace up her sleeve, evidence so damning, so absolute, that it would not only end the trial, but completely annihilate Vance Crow's existence. The inexorable eye of technology was about to open. The prosecution calls its next witness, Sofia Ortega announced, her voice resonating through the tense atmosphere of the courtroom. Or rather, its next 4 witnesses. A massive 80-inch television screen was wheeled into the center of the room, directly in front of the jury. We would like to present Exhibit A, a synchronized multi-angle recording of the events. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Vance Crow shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney, Grant Wallace, looked momentarily confused. This had not been on the evidence list they had received. Objection, Your Honor, Wallace said, rising. We have not had the opportunity to review this evidence. On the contrary, Your Honor, Ortega replied smoothly. The defense was provided with all the original material from which this compilation was made. We simply took the liberty of synchronizing the time codes to present a clear, sequential narrative to the jury. This is solely for clarity. The judge, a stern woman named Roland Voss, looked over her glasses. I'll allow it. Proceed, Miss Ortega. Ortega dimmed the courtroom lights. What you are about to see, she said, her voice resonating in the silence, is the unvarnished truth. The screen lit up, divided into 4 quadrants. The upper left image, labeled Doorbell Camera 1, showed a wide view of the street. The upper right corresponded to the gated community's camera, with a clearer angle from another direction. The lower left was the vehicle's dashcam with audio activated. And the lower right, the one that froze Crow's blood, was labeled Officer Crow Body Camera Recovered. The video began. In the 2 upper quadrants, the jury saw Aria's red McLaren gliding smoothly down the street, within its lane and at a calm speed. There was no weaving, no erratic driving. Crow's first lie crumbled. Then they saw Crow's patrol car pull in abruptly and stop the vehicle. The audio from the dashcam filled the courtroom. They heard Aria's calm, polite voice. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" Then they heard Crow's reply, dripping with condescension. "I'll ask the questions here. You were driving erratically." A murmur of astonishment swept the room. The video directly contradicted his sworn statement. The scene continued. The jury heard the entire exchange exactly as Aria had described it. They heard her firm refusal to be intimidated. Then they heard the most damning part of the audio, Crow's voice, low and threatening. Sometimes a contribution to the police charity fund can go a long way toward keeping things running smoothly for you. A little show of community support, you understand. Grant Wallace's face collapsed in shock. He shot a furious look at Crow, who seemed to shrink in his chair, his skin a deathly gray. He had lied to his own attorney, but the worst was yet to come. The quadrant labeled Officer Crow Body Camera suddenly lit up. The recording was from Crow's own perspective, crystal clear. The state's technology experts had not only recovered the file, they had restored it to its original state. The jury now witnessed the encounter from Crow's point of view. They saw him stare at Aria's body. They saw the contempt on his face reflected in the car window. They saw that Aria made not a single furtive movement. Her hands remained visible on the steering wheel at all times. The video showed Crow's face twisting with rage when she rejected his bribe and challenged his authority. They watched him draw his taser without any provocation. The courtroom watched in horrified silence as the video showed the laser dots on Aria's chest. They heard her gasp of terror, then witnessed the brutal electrical discharge in first person. The camera shook as Crow fired, and the sickening sound of the taser and Aria's scream of pain filled the room. The camera then tilted downward, showing Aria's convulsing body on the pavement, and the audio captured the final, incriminating proof. Crow's voice, which had appeared in neither the official report nor his testimony, but was a guttural, hate-filled growl directed at himself as he watched her seize. "That'll teach you to talk back." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, deep, oppressive. It was broken only by a choked sob from a woman on the jury. Every eye was fixed on Vance Crow. He was a man completely exposed, his lies laid bare, his cruelty displayed for all to see. His carefully constructed narrative, his entire defense, had been annihilated in 3 minutes by the relentless, impartial gaze of technology. Grant Wallace slumped heavily, face pale. His case was not merely lost, it was irreparable. He had been turned into a fool, a mouthpiece for a monster. Sofia Ortega stood in the center of the courtroom, allowing the silence to stretch, allowing the horror to sink deep into the hearts of the jury. She did not need to say a word. The video had said everything, but she was not finished. This was only the beginning. The video had shown what happened. Now she was about to call a witness who would explain the significance of the matter on a scale no one in that room could yet comprehend. "Your Honor," Ortega said, her voice resonating with a newly discovered strength. "The prosecution calls its next witness. We call the Honorable Governor Elias Crow." The courtroom erupted in uproar. The bailiff's call for order was lost in a sea of gasps of astonishment and frantic whispers. Reporters frantically searched for their phones, typing at top speed as they tried to report the bombshell. The Honorable Governor Elias Crow was present as a witness. It was unthinkable. Vance Crow looked up, face contorted with bewilderment. His attorney, Grant Wallace, stared at the courtroom entrance as if he had seen a ghost. The side door of the courtroom opened, and Governor Elias Crow entered. He was not accompanied by a security detail or an entourage. He walked alone, with measured, deliberate steps. He wore a simple dark navy suit, but he radiated an aura of power more imposing than any uniform or robe. He broke the stunned silence with his gaze fixed straight ahead and took his seat in the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible and took the oath. His calm, firm voice resonated through the microphone. Sofia Ortega approached the stand. "Could you state your name and occupation for the record?" "My name is Elias Crow. I am the governor of this state." The words, though expected, struck with incredible force. The jury was captivated, leaning forward in their seats. "Governor Crow," Ortega began in a respectful but firm voice, "you are undoubtedly a very busy man. Why are you here today in this courtroom testifying in an assault case against a police officer?" The governor turned his gaze from Ortega and looked directly at the jury. For the first time, they did not see a politician. They saw a father. The iron control in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of profound pain. "I am here today," he said in a soft voice that nevertheless resonated in every corner of the room, "because the victim in this case, the woman who was brutally assaulted by the defendant, is my daughter, Aria Voss." A second shockwave swept through the courtroom, even more powerful than the first. Crow's mouth fell open. He felt as if the floor had opened beneath his feet, plunging him into a bottomless abyss. His daughter, the ghetto criminal, the drug addict, the arrogant one, was the governor's daughter. At last he understood. The state investigators, the wiretaps, the airtight case. This was not merely the system working. This was the system being used as a weapon of absolute paternal vengeance. "Governor," Ortega continued gently, "this must be incredibly difficult for you." "What is difficult, Ms. Ortega?" the governor said, hardening his voice and locking his gaze on Vance Crow, "is knowing that a man who swore to protect the citizens of this state used his badge as a license to brutally mistreat my child. What is difficult is knowing that he then lied under oath, committed perjury, and attempted to destroy her reputation to cover up his own criminal acts." "Objection," Wallace stammered, rising quickly. "The witness is offering narrative and drawing conclusions." "Overruled," the judge said, though her gaze was also fixed on the governor. "Governor, please limit your answers to the questions asked." "My apologies, Your Honor," the governor said, though he did not sound apologetic. Ortega nodded. "Governor, upon learning of the assault on your daughter, you took certain steps. Could you describe them for the court?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Recognizing the inherent and enormous conflict of interest, I abstained from directly overseeing the investigation. I instructed the Attorney General to proceed as he would with any other case of this gravity, but with one condition, that it be conducted with the utmost integrity, free from any political influence, including my own. My only role was that of a concerned father, receiving periodic updates on my daughter's medical condition and the progress of the case. It was a masterful political statement that framed his actions as an ethical duty while reminding everyone present of the immense power he had chosen to temporarily restrain." "And why did you consider it necessary to keep your relationship to the victim secret until this moment?" Ortega asked. "Because this case is not about me," the governor answered in a firm, convinced voice. "And it is not only about my daughter. It is about the defendant, Vance Crow. I did not want his defense to be able to claim this was a political persecution, a witch hunt, orchestrated by a powerful man. I wanted the evidence to speak for itself. I wanted the jury to see his actions, hear his lies, and judge him according to the truth of what he did that day to a woman he believed was defenseless. You have already seen the truth. You have seen the video. You have heard the audio. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Now I am here to tell you what will happen next. Now I am here to speak not only as a father, but as governor. Because what was done to my daughter was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease, a cancer of corruption and intolerance that has been allowed to fester within our law enforcement agencies for far too long. And I am here to tell you and the defendant that the man he chose to attack has given me the political capital, the public mandate, and the personal will to cut that cancer out, whatever the cost. He was no longer a simple witness. He was a force of nature. He was wielding the full power of his office right there on the stand. It was a bold, stunning move. He had set the trap, allowed Crow to fall into it, sprung it with the video evidence, and now he was there to deliver the final blow. I was not merely seeking the conviction of the man who had harmed his daughter. He was declaring war on the entire system that had created and protected him. And Vance Crow, pale and trembling, finally understood that he was not merely being tried for his freedom. He was the epicenter of a revolution. With the governor's testimony still resonating in the air like thunder, the prosecution entered the devastating final phase of its case. This was no longer only about one afternoon, one assault. It was about establishing a pattern of malice and corruption spanning a career. Sofia Ortega was about to dissect Vance Crow's professional trajectory with the cold, methodical precision of a pathologist examining a diseased organ. "Your Honor," Ortega announced, "the prosecution wishes to present as evidence a statistical analysis of the defendant's career compiled from official department records." An easel was brought forward and placed in front of the jury. On it was a large, professionally printed chart titled 15-Year Career Analysis of Officer Vance Crow. The numbers were stark and damning. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ortega began, using a laser pointer to highlight the key figures. Over the course of his career, Officer Crow made a total of 1,228 arrests. As you can see in this first chart, 984 of those arrests, an astonishing 87%, involved people of color. Yet the demographic data of the precincts where he has served show a minority population of only 38%. This is not a simple statistical anomaly. It is a clear and undeniable pattern of racial discrimination. Crow's attorney, Grant Wallace, remained seated with his head bowed, offering no objections. There was nothing to object to. These were official figures, irrefutable facts. To challenge them would be like challenging gravity. Ortega moved to the next chart. Let us examine Officer Crow's use of force. The data show that he reported using physical force, from open-hand strikes to the use of a baton or taser, in 62% of his arrests of minority suspects. In contrast, he employed force in only 11% of his arrests of white suspects. This means he was nearly 6 times more likely to use violence against a person of color. She left the figure hanging in the air as proof of his intolerance. "But perhaps the most damning statistic of all is this," she said, lowering her voice to capture the jury's attention. She pointed to a bar graph titled Case Dismissal Rates. Of the 984 minority arrests made by Officer Crow, 412, 42%, were ultimately dismissed by the prosecutor's office. And why were they dismissed? She advanced to a final slide with detailed information. Among the reasons cited by prosecutors are lack of credible evidence, constitutional rights violations during search and seizure, and inconsistent or false testimony by the arresting officer. She stepped away from the chart and addressed the jury directly. What does this tell us? It tells us that for years, Officer Vance Crow has waged a personal war against the minority citizens of this city. It tells us that he is not only a violent officer, but a corrupt one who systematically lies and violates the Constitution to make arrests. And it tells us that the system until now has failed to stop him. And she was not finished. I would like to call a series of rebuttal witnesses to testify to the character of the defendant. What followed was a heartbreaking parade of Crow's past victims, people whose complaints had been dismissed as unfounded for years. First came Mrs. Rosa Mendez, a petite 68-year-old grandmother. With tears in her eyes, she described how Crow had stopped her for a broken taillight, called her lazy, and violently handcuffed her because she was slow to retrieve her vehicle documents. Next, Jamal Rivera, now a 28-year-old architect, recounted how as a 17-year-old straight-A student, Crow had slammed him against a wall and searched his backpack without cause, claiming he matched a description. When Jamal protested, Crow arrested him for disorderly conduct, a charge that was later dropped but cost his family thousands in legal fees. Finally, they called Dr. Julian Kane, a distinguished cardiologist. He described the night Crow arrested him for trying to enter his own home in an affluent neighborhood, refusing to believe a black man could live there. Kane spoke of the profound humiliation of being jailed and treated like a common criminal simply because of the color of his skin. With each testimony, the jury's expression hardened. This was no longer merely a police officer who had made a mistake. They were face to face with a monster who had hidden behind a badge for more than a decade, terrorizing the innocent and corrupting justice. The prosecution's final piece of evidence was a simple sheet of paper projected onto the giant screen for all to see. It was a financial summary from the city controller's office. "And what is the cost of Officer Crow's style of policing?" Ortega asked rhetorically. Over the course of his career, the city has paid $3.1 million in civil settlements related to this officer's conduct. $3.1 million of taxpayer money, not to build parks or fund schools, but to remediate the legal consequences of one man's unchecked hatred. Ortega returned to her table and sat down. She had not only proven Crow's guilt for assaulting Aria Voss, she had proven his guilt for years of terror. She had unmasked him as a racist, a liar, and a financial burden on the very city he had sworn to protect. She had taken every lie he had told, every life he had damaged, and woven them into a shroud for his career. The defense had no rebuttal. There was no cross-examination of the pie chart. There was no challenge to the ledger. Wallace simply stood and said, "The defense rests. The trial, for all practical purposes, was over." Only the verdict remained, a formality that everyone in the room already knew. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. It was a crushing, irrefutable weight of evidence. When they returned to the jury box, their faces were grim and resolved. None of them looked at Vance Crow. In the unspoken language of the courtroom, that was the definitive, unequivocal signal of doom. The court clerk received the verdict form from the jury foreperson. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words that would seal Crow's fate. "On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, what is your verdict?" "Guilty," the foreperson answered in a firm, clear voice. "On the charge of perjury, what is your verdict?" "Guilty." "On the charge of violation of civil rights under color of law, what is your verdict?" "Guilty." "On the charge of solicitation of a bribe, what is your verdict?" "Guilty." With each declaration, a shockwave swept through the courtroom. It was a total debacle, an absolute, unequivocal repudiation of Crow and everything he represented. Crow himself seemed to collapse inwardly. The last remnants of his arrogance and defiance faded, leaving behind an empty, terrified man. He stared straight ahead with a vacant gaze. His life was now measured in the cold, relentless numbers of a prison sentence. Aria Voss, seated in the front row with her father, closed her eyes and drew a deep, shuddering breath. It was not a moment of triumph or celebration. It was a moment of profound, painful relief. At last, justice had been delivered. Justice so long denied to so many of Crow's victims. The governor placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. his face impassive. After the verdict was read and the judge set a date for sentencing, the Crow family was escorted through a secure exit, avoiding the media frenzy that had erupted outside the courthouse. An hour later, Governor Elias Crow stood at a podium on the steps of the state capitol before a sea of cameras and reporters. This was not a celebration. It was a call to action. Today, a jury of his peers found a man guilty of atrocious crimes committed under the color of law, he began, his powerful voice resonating through the crowd. But while justice was done for one man, our work is far from finished. This trial was not only about the actions of Vance Crow. It was a referendum on a system that allowed a man like him to thrive for years, amass 42 complaints, and cost taxpayers more than $3 million, all while continuing to carry a badge and a gun. He looked directly into the main network camera, addressing not only the press, but every citizen of his state. Today's verdict is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is a promise. I solemnly promise every citizen of this state that the era of police impunity is over. Gone are the days when complaints were ignored, when the wall of silence protected the corrupt, when our minority communities lived in fear of those who were supposed to protect them. Those days are finished. His voice rose with controlled passion, a fire that held the attention. Effective immediately, I have signed an executive order creating the Police Accountability and Reform Task Force. It will be an independent body with subpoena power, composed of civil rights leaders, legal experts, and community advocates. Its first mandate will be to conduct a comprehensive review of the department that employed Vance Crow. Its second mandate will be to draft new state legislation establishing the gold standard in police transparency, training, and above all, consequences. He paused, allowing the magnitude of his announcement to sink in. This was a radical shift in state policy. This will not be easy. There will be resistance from those who benefit from the status quo. But I want to make this perfectly clear. I will not be intimidated. I will expend every ounce of my political capital to achieve this. We will have civilian oversight boards with real power. We will have a public database of police misconduct. We will implement automatic, mandatory state review of any use of force incident. We will create a system where a good officer has nothing to fear and a bad officer has nowhere to hide. He concluded his speech on a personal note, softening his voice. My daughter was attacked by a man who did not see her as a citizen, but as a stereotype. He saw her as defenseless. He was wrong. Today, we have begun the work of ensuring that no citizen of this state will ever again feel defenseless before a police officer. The work begins now. He stepped away from the podium without taking questions, leaving the press stunned. The news spread like wildfire. The guilty verdict was no longer the lead story. The governor had just leveraged the momentum of his family's personal tragedy to launch an ambitious, far-reaching crusade for systemic reform. He had transformed his personal pain into a public promise. Vance Crow, blinded by hatred, had intended to humiliate a black woman. Instead, without knowing it, he had handed the most powerful man in the state the hammer with which he would now dismantle the entire corrupt machine. The sentencing hearing of Vance Crow was a somber final act in a drama that had captivated the state. The courtroom was once again packed, but the palpable tension of the trial had vanished, replaced by a heavy sense of finality. Crow, dressed in a faded prison jumpsuit, was brought before Judge Roland Voss. He was a broken man. 15 years of absolute power had been stripped away, leaving only a defendant with a vacant stare, waiting for his fate. His attorney presented a weak plea for leniency, citing Crow's years of service and the stresses of the job. Crow himself was given the opportunity to speak. He stood with his hands cuffed and mumbled a barely audible apology to Arya in the courtroom. It was the pathetic, self-serving plea of a man who regretted only having been caught. Judge Voss remained impassive. She looked down from the bench with an expression of cold contempt. "Mr. Crow," she began, her voice resonating in the silent room. For years you were entrusted with a badge, a gun, and the power of the state. You swore to protect and serve. Instead, you chose to prey upon the vulnerable. You used your authority not as a shield for the innocent, but as a weapon against those you deemed unworthy because of the color of their skin. She lifted a stack of letters. In preparing this sentence, I have read the victim impact statements, not only from Ms. Voss, but from a dozen of your prior victims, people whose lives you damaged and who never saw a day of justice. They spoke of fear, of humiliation, of the loss of faith in the very system that should have protected them. You were not a police officer, Mr. Crow. You were a cancer in uniform. She leaned forward. You assaulted. You perjured yourself. You dishonored your office. But your greatest crime was the arrogance of believing yourself untouchable. In attacking Arya Voss, you made a catastrophic error. You assumed she was just another victim who would be ignored. But in doing so, you unwittingly illuminated your own dark trajectory. And under that light, we all saw the monster you truly are. Her final words rang out like the fall of a guillotine. This court must send a clear message. No one is above the law. The abuse of power will be punished with the full weight of justice. Therefore, this court sentences Vance Crowe to serve a term of 22 years in the state penitentiary. In addition, he is ordered to pay restitution to Ms. Voss in the amount of $500,000. Take him away. As Crowe was escorted from the courtroom, his dry eyes finally broke and tears began to fall. A new chapter began for the state. Governor Elias Crowe kept his word. The task force he created was relentless. The investigation into Crowe's precinct uncovered a deeply entrenched culture of corruption and racism. The police chief was forced to resign. 6 other officers, including Crowe's union representative, were charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The rookie officer Vargas became a key cooperating witness. His testimony helped root out the corruption. The James Act, a comprehensive police reform bill drafted by the task force, was passed by the state legislature some time later. It was the strictest accountability law in the country and became a model for other states. The public database of police misconduct went live, and for the first time, citizens could look up the records of the officers who patrolled their neighborhoods. Arya Voss, after a long and difficult recovery, used the $500,000 restitution, together with a significant portion of her own fortune, to found the St. Clair Foundation for Justice. It became a powerful nonprofit that provided legal assistance to victims of police brutality and advocated for reform at the national level. She transformed her trauma into a powerful force for change, becoming a respected and influential voice for those who had none. The red McLaren was sold and replaced with a far more discreet vehicle. She no longer needed trophies. She had found her purpose. The memory of that afternoon would never fade, but it was no longer a source of pain. It was a source of strength, a reminder of the battle she had survived and the war she was now determined to win. In the end, the story of Vance Crowe is a stark reminder of a simple and profound truth. Hatred is a boomerang. The prejudice he harbored for so long, the cruelty he dispensed so freely, ultimately destroyed him. He built his identity on a fragile sense of superiority, believing his badge made him a king and everyone else his subjects. But power that flows from oppression is an illusion, a house of cards waiting for a single breath of defiance to bring it down. Arya Voss was that breath. The world did not change overnight. Prejudice did not disappear, and injustice did not cease to exist. But on a sunny street in a quiet suburb, one simple act of defiance set in motion a chain of events that tilted the scales of morality a little closer to justice. A corrupt officer was removed. A corrupt system was forced to confront its reflection. A woman targeted for her supposed weakness discovered the true depth of her strength, and in doing so, empowered countless others. The echo of that day would resonate for years, proof that sometimes the deepest changes do not begin in the halls of power, but in the heart of a single person who simply refuses to be broken. What part of this story impacted you the most? Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power? Have you ever longed for a justice like this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and please support the channel so we can continue bringing you stories where the light always wins in the end.